She meant to send it to him. She sent it to me. 11 words that came up on my phone at 5 in the morning, while I was already out in the dark with the cattle. Can't wait for tonight. He'll be in the back field till dark. I stood there in the cold, with my breath fogging and the herd shifting around me, and I read those 11 words 4 times. He'll be in the back field till dark. He was me. She had told another man my own schedule. The hours I would be out working the land so the two of them would have my house to themselves. And in her hurry, she had sent it to the very man it was meant to hide from. I did not call her. I did not drive up to the house and kick the door. I put the phone in my coat pocket and I finished feeding the cattle. Because the cattle do not care about your marriage and the work does not wait. And somewhere in the rhythm of it, hay and breath and the grey light coming up over the ridge, I got very calm. I farm for a living. I have learned the hard way that root rot does not show at the top. The stalk stays green. The leaves look fine. The whole field looks like a standing crop right up until one good wind lays it flat. Because there was never anything underneath holding it down. My marriage was a field of root rot. It had looked green for years. That text was the wind. Stay with me, because what I did over the next few months, instead of what I wanted to do standing in that pasture, is the whole reason I am telling you this. My wife was about to demand half of everything, sure as sunrise, and she was getting bad advice from a man who had been circling our land like a buzzard for 2 years. And she was about to learn that the quiet farmer she thought she had figured out had read the ground a long time ago, and had roots she never knew were there. I am 52 years old, and I farm the same ground in Tennessee that my great-grandfather cleared with a mule and a strong back. 4 generations. Cattle and hay and a few hundred acres in a valley where everybody knows whose tractor that is, just by the sound of it coming up the road. I have been married for 26 years. We have a son who is 17 and wants nothing in this world more than to be the 5th generation to work this place, and a daughter, grown and gone, with a family of her own. If you are out there tonight, on land your people bled for, or just somewhere quiet and tired, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. There are more of us holding on to things our grandfathers built than you would think. Let me tell you about the trust first, because without it, none of the rest lands. I married Donna when I was 26. She was a town girl, and I was a farm boy, and that should have told me something. But love does not do math. She knew what she was marrying. She knew the hours, the seasons, the way a farm owns you more than you own it. And for a long time I believed she had made her peace with it, the way I had made mine, because it was the only life I ever wanted, and I thought it was enough for her too. Here is the part that matters, the part that is going to come back at the end. Before we married, my daddy sat me down. He was old-fashioned, and he was hard, and he loved this land more than he loved being liked. And he told me, "Son, this ground has been in this family for 100 years, and you are not going to be the one who loses half of it to a divorce court." He made me get a prenuptial agreement, a real one, drawn up by a lawyer in the county seat, with everything laid out plain. What was the family's stayed the family's, the land, the herd, the name. Donna signed it. We were young and in love, and she signed it without much thought, and we never spoke of it again in 26 years. I will be honest, I half forgot it existed. But my daddy did not forget. And he had made sure the lawyer kept a copy, and that copy was about to matter more than anything else in this story. Listen to your hard old fathers, fellows. Sometimes the meanest advice is the advice that saves you. And I worked. Lord, I worked. A farm does not have an off switch. I was up before the sun 365 days a year, carving in the cold, baling in the heat, fixing fence in the rain. Because that is what the land asks, and a man who takes on land takes on all of it. I told myself the work was love. Every early morning was a roof and a future and a legacy for my boy. When a man pours himself into ground like that, he tells himself the family can feel how much he loves them in the sweat of it. Maybe they cannot. Maybe Donna stood at the kitchen window all those mornings, watching me disappear into the fields, and felt not loved, but left. I have had to sit with that. But it does not change what she did. And it does not change whose name was on the deed. I want you to know what this land actually is. Because to a man like Cole, it was a number on a spreadsheet, and to me it was my whole life, and 3 lives before mine. My great-grandfather cleared the first 40 acres with a mule and his own 2 hands, pulling stumps until his palms were leather. My grandfather held on to it through the Depression when half the valley got sold off for pennies, ate squirrel and cornbread rather than sign the land away. My daddy doubled it, bought the back acreage when the neighbor passed, and worked himself into an early grave doing it. Every fence post out there, somebody in my blood set in the ground. The big oak by the pond, my grandmother planted as a switch. I learned to drive a tractor at 9, sitting in my daddy's lap. I buried both my parents looking out over that valley. That is what a developer calls a parcel. That is what my wife was prepared to hand to a buzzard so she could have a condo and an easy man. You cannot put a price on 100 years of a family's back. And the fact that 2 people tried to is the part I had to forgive the hardest. Here is the part that matters. The part that is going to come back at the end. Before we married, my daddy sat me down. He was old-fashioned and he was hard, and he loved this land more than he loved being liked. And he told me, "Son, this ground has been in this family for 100 years, and you are not going to be the one who loses half of it to a divorce court." He made me get a prenuptial agreement, a real one, drawn up by a lawyer in the county seat, with everything laid out plain. What was the family's stayed the family's, the land, the herd, the name. Donna signed it. We were young and in love, and she signed it without much thought, and we never spoke of it again in 26 years. I will be honest, I half forgot it existed, but my daddy did not forget, and he had made sure the lawyer kept a copy, and that copy was about to matter more than anything else in this story. Listen to your hard old fathers. Sometimes the meanest sounding advice is the advice that saves you. The phone, of course, face down, a passcode, carried everywhere, the usual. Trips to town that took twice as long as town takes, a sudden interest in what the land might be worth, which I thought was just a wife being practical, asking me one too many times whether I had ever thought about what a developer would pay for a valley like ours. And the man, who I will get to, who started showing up at the edges of our life, at the feed store, at church, at the diner, a smooth fellow in clean boots that had never seen a cow, always friendly, always asking about the acreage. The money was strange too, but I'm a farmer, and our money is always strange, good years and bad, so I did not read it as fast as I should have. There was more going to town than came back in groceries. A storage unit I did not place. Clothes nicer than a farm wife wears to a farm. Everyone had an answer, and I took every answer, because questioning my wife of 26 years felt like questioning the ground under my own feet. There were other things I sanded smooth. The way you do. The way she stopped riding out to the back pastures with me on Sunday evenings, the way she had for 20 years. Said her back hurt. Then took up driving to town those same evenings instead. The way she got cold about the farm itself. Started calling it a money pit and a ball and chain in front of our son, when for 2 decades she had called it home. A new perfume. A second phone charger in her car that did not match either of our phones. And our boy, 17 and sharp, getting quiet around his mama, watching her a little too carefully, the way a kid watches weather he does not have words for yet. I read every one of those as something else, because I'm a man who trusts the ground he stands on, and it never once occurred to me to test whether the ground had gone hollow underneath. That is the oldest mistake there is. The field you stop walking is the field that fails. Now to the man. His name was Cole, and Cole was a developer. He had been buying up valley farmland for 2 years, a few hundred acres here, a family that gave up there, turning hayfields into cul-de-sacs with names like Whispering Pines, where there were no pines and nothing whispered but money. He had come to me twice with an offer for our place, and twice I had told him, polite, that this ground was not for sale at any price, that my boy was going to farm it after me. He had smiled both times like a man who knew something I did not. And it turned out he did. Because while I was telling Cole the land would never be his, Cole had found another way onto it, through my wife, who had started to dream of the check he dangled and the easy life that came with it. He did not just want my land, he wanted it the lazy way, by getting my wife to hand him half of it in a divorce. That was the play. I just did not see the whole board until that text came up at 5 in the morning. That night, before I ever called a lawyer, I did the thing a farmer does when the weight of a place gets too heavy to carry indoors. I walked the fields. I walked the back 40 in the dark with a flashlight I did not turn on, knowing the ground by feel the way you know your own kitchen. And I stood at the fence line my grandfather built, and I let myself feel the whole size of what was coming. It was not the marriage I grieved out there. The marriage had been rot for years and I knew it now. It was the land. It was the picture of a sign at the end of the drive with the developer's logo on it, of bulldozers where the herd grazes, of my boy with no ground to give his life to, of being the one out of 4 generations who let it go. A man can survive losing a wife. I was not sure I could survive being the one who lost the farm. I stood out there until my hands went numb, and then I made myself a promise on my grandfather's fence line that whatever else happened, this ground would still be ours when the sun came up on the other side of it. Then I went in, and I slept 2 hours, and I fed the cattle, and I drove to town. That morning, after the cattle were fed, I did not go up to the house. I drove into the county seat and I sat down with a lawyer. And what that lawyer told me is the most useful thing I can hand you tonight. So write it down. Do not confront. Not yet. Get quiet. Get your papers in order. And find out what you actually own before she finds out what she does not. The lawyer was a woman who had been doing this for almost 30 years and had handled a lot of farm divorces, which in this part of the country is its own specialty, because land and family and 100 years of history do not divide like a checking account. I laid it all out, the text, the developer, the questions about what the land would bring, and then I told her about the prenup my daddy made me sign 26 years ago, and I watched her sit up straight, the good kind of straight, the way I sit up when I find out a field has better drainage than I thought. She told me some things about Tennessee that I am going to share the shape of. Though I want to be clear, I am no lawyer, and your state runs its own way, and you need your own attorney for your own life. This is just my story. She told me that Tennessee splits things fairly, which does not always mean in half, and that the first and biggest question in any divorce is what counts as the marriage's property and what counts as just mine. She told me that land a man owned before the marriage, or that came to him by inheritance from his family, can stay his alone. Separate property, the law calls it, not subject to being divided at all. But, and this was the part that made my stomach drop, she told me it is not automatic. She said, separate property can lose its protection if you mix it up with the marriage too much. If marital money and marital years and marital sweat pour into it until you cannot tell anymore where the family land stops and the marriage begins. She called it commingling, and she said the burden would be on me to prove, with records, that the farm had stayed what it always was. Tracing, she called it. And then she said the thing that changed everything. She said, but you have a prenuptial agreement, and if it was done right, freely and knowingly and with everything disclosed, this state will honor it, and it may settle the whole question before it ever starts. She explained it to me plain. the way I needed it. Think of it like two creeks, she said. One creek is the family land, the thing you brought into this marriage from your blood. The other creek is the marriage, everything the two of you built together. As long as those two creeks run in separate beds, the law can tell them apart, and the family creek stays yours. The danger is when a man lets the two run together for 30 years, until it is all one muddy river, and no judge alive can say which water came from where, and then the whole river gets split. But a prenuptial agreement, she said, is like a deed to the creek bed itself. It says in writing, before the water ever flowed, this creek is his, and that one is shared. And if it was signed honest, a Tennessee court will pick that document up and honor it, even after all the years. I drove home from that meeting holding onto the word deed like a fence post in a flood. Because for the first time since 5 that morning, I had something solid to put my hand on. So I had a card, but I want to be honest with you about how scared I was, even with that card in my hand. Because for a stretch of this, it did not feel like enough. She gave me the rules first. The same rules I would give you no matter where you farm or what you do. Do not move off the place, because the day you leave the land you have written the story of who walked away. Do not sell a cow or move a dollar in a way that looks like you are hiding it. Do not confront, because the second she knows you know, the developer's lawyers get involved and the whole thing gets harder. Document everything. Find every paper that proves what this farm is and where it came from, before she ever knows you are looking. So I went back to work, and I became an actor. I did not know a farmer had in him. I came in for supper. I asked about her day. I lay in bed next to a woman who was counting the hours until I would be out in the back field. And I kept my voice even and my hands steady, because the day she knew I knew was the day Cole's lawyers would start building their side. I have pulled a breech calf in a sleet storm with my arm numb to the shoulder. Nothing was as hard as passing the cornbread to a woman who had texted another man my own work schedule. And I dug, the way I dig a post hole, straight down and patient. I went up into the attic where my daddy's old papers were, the deeds going back 4 generations, the will that left me the land, the prenuptial agreement in a yellowed envelope, right where the lawyer had told him to keep a copy. I gathered the records that showed the farm accounts had always run separate from the household, because my daddy had drilled that into me too. Keep the farm's money and the family's money in different buckets, son. And for once in my life I had listened. I found the proof that the land had come down to me by blood and stayed in my name, and never once been folded into anything joint. It took weeks, sitting up at the kitchen table after everyone slept, a farmer doing paperwork by lamplight. But by the end, I had a stack that told the whole 100-year story of this ground, and not one chapter of it belonged to Cole or to the divorce he was trying to engineer. I want to walk you through that work a little, because some of you own something your family built, and you need to hear how it gets protected. It was not glamorous. It was a dusty attic and a flashlight and my reading glasses, going box by box through a hard old man's papers. But every document I found was a fence post in a line the court would have to respect. The original deed with my great-grandfather's name, the chain of title coming down through my grandfather and my daddy to me, never once with Donna's name added. The will, the separate farm operating account I had kept since the day my daddy died, never mixed with the household money. The tax records filed under the farm, not under us. My lawyer had told me the whole case would come down to one boring word: tracing. The ability to show with paper that the land had stayed what it always was and never bled into the marriage. Most men cannot do it, because most men let the buckets mix over the years without thinking. I could do it. Not because I was smart, but because a hard old man had made me keep the buckets separate 40 years ago, and I had been too stubborn to ever change it. The paperwork I resented my whole life turned out to be the wall that saved the farm. I kept all of it off the house, on the advice of my lawyer, locked in a box at the bank, because the one night I had the prenup out on the kitchen table, Donna came down for water and I had just enough time to slide it under a seed catalogue before she saw. She asked what I was doing up. I told her I was figuring hay prices, which a farmer can say at any hour and be believed. After that, the papers lived at the bank. Keep your proof where your own house cannot reach it. That is not paranoia. That is just keeping your seed corn somewhere the mice cannot get to it. Here is the part where it nearly went wrong, and I want every man who owns something his family built to hear this. When it all came into the open, Donna's lawyer, who I am sure was getting a nudge from Cole's people, did not just ask for half the marriage, they came for the farm itself. They argued that 26 years of my marriage, my wife's years of cooking and raising our kids and standing by while I worked, plus all the marital money and labor that had gone into the place over the decades, had turned my family's separate land into marital property. They argued the prenup was old and vague, and that I had let the line blur so badly over 26 years that the farm was half hers now, and they pushed for the one thing that would have ended 4 generations in an afternoon. They pushed for the court to order the farm sold and the money split. And I will tell you, there was a stretch of weeks where my own lawyer was careful with me, would not promise, and I lay awake at night with a fear no drought ever put in me, the fear of being the generation that lost the land. Of looking my 17-year-old in the eye and telling him the farm he wanted to give his life to had been auctioned to pay for his mother's new one. I want to be honest about how that argument can work, because it scared me precisely because it was not crazy. They were not making it up out of thin air. The law really does say that if you pour enough marital money and marital effort into separate land over enough years, you can blur the line until a court calls it shared. And I had farmed that ground with marital money and marital years for 2.5 decades. For a few weeks, I genuinely did not know if the wall would hold. And there is a particular kind of sick a man feels when he realizes that the harder he worked the family land, the stronger their argument that he had turned it into something the marriage could take. There were nights I sat at that kitchen table with the lamp on and the papers spread out and my heart pounding, doing the math on whether 100 years ended with me. I did not let my boy see 1 minute of that fear. He needed to believe the ground was solid, even on the nights I was not sure it was. Carrying that alone, keeping the worry off a 17-year-old's shoulders, was the heaviest thing I lifted in the whole ordeal. Heavier than any hay I ever stacked. What saved it was not luck, and it was not a clever trick. It was the prenup my hard old daddy made me sign when I was too young to know better, holding up exactly as the law said a good one could. And it was the tracing, the boring stack of papers proving the farm's money had always run separate, that the land had come down by blood and never been transmuted into something the marriage could claim. Where there was genuinely marital property, the equipment we had bought together, the savings from the good years, the value the marriage had truly added, I did not fight dirty. I let her have a fair share of what was fairly hers, because I am not a thief, and the law is not a weapon for taking what is not yours. But the land, the 100-year ground, the herd, the name, stayed exactly where 4 generations had kept it, with the family, with my boy's future intact. Donna had walked into that courtroom believing she was getting half a valley and a fresh start with a man in clean boots. She walked out with a fair share of the marriage and not 1 inch of the farm, because the marriage and the farm were never the same thing, no matter how badly she and Cole needed them to be. And Cole. Here is the part that tells you everything about a man like that. The day it became clear there would be no farm to sell, no land to develop, no easy fortune to split, Cole evaporated like dew off the hay at 9 in the morning. He had never wanted my wife. He had wanted my dirt, and my wife was just the cheapest way he thought he could get to it. The minute the dirt was off the table, so was she. She learned, the hard and bitter way, that the man who flattered her with talk of an easy life would not spend $1 or 1 day on her once she could not hand him what he was really after. That is its own justice, and I did not lift a hand to build it. The truth just lets a man like Cole be exactly what he always was. a buzzard, once there is nothing left for him to pick at.
I heard later, the way you hear things in a valley, that Cole moved on to the next farm and the next family, working the same patient game. Because that is all he is. A man who waits at the edge of other people's land for a weak moment. I do not waste anger on him anymore. A buzzard is just a buzzard. The mistake was never that the buzzard circled. The mistake was that I left so much of the carcass of my own marriage lying out in the open for 2 years without ever looking up to see what was wheeling overhead. That one is on me, and I have made my peace with it. I want to tell you about my son, because he is the whole reason the fight was worth fighting. Through all of it, I kept him out of the ugly parts. But a 17-year-old knows when his family is shaking. One evening, near the worst of it, he found me out by the equipment shed, and he asked me straight, the way only a kid that age can. "Are we going to lose the farm, Dad?" And I looked at that boy, the 5th generation, the one who can already read a sky better than men twice his age, and I made him a promise I was not yet sure I could keep. I told him this ground would be his to farm, that his great-great-granddaddy cleared it, and no court and no developer was going to be the end of it, and that he should keep his hands on the work and let me carry the rest. And then I went inside and worked twice as hard on those papers, because I had just given my word to my boy, and a man does not break his word to his son about the only thing that boy has ever wanted. When it was finally over, and the land was secure, I did not make a speech about it. I just handed him the keys to the big tractor for spring planting, the way my daddy handed them to me. And he understood. Some things you say with keys. I am not going to give you a scene where she came crawling back 6 months later, because she did not. And I am glad, because that is not the kind of ending this is. What I will give you is the truth of how it actually ended, which was quieter and meant more. The day she signed the last of the papers, she came out to the farm to get the last of her things. I was in the yard. My son was up on the tractor, the 5th generation, already better with it than I was at his age. And Donna stood at the gate a long moment, looking out over the valley, the back field and the ridge, and the herd moving slow across the green. The whole 100 years of it. The thing she had been ready to sell to a buzzard for a fresh start. She did not say anything. I think she finally understood, standing at that gate, what she had actually traded, and what it had actually been worth, and that it had never once been hers to sell. Then she got in her car, and she drove down the road I had watched her drive 1,000 times, and I turned and watched my boy bring the tractor around, and I felt the ground steady under my feet. The same ground my great-grandfather cleared, still ours. I stood at that gate a while after her dust settled. I am not going to lie to you and say I felt nothing but victory, because I did not. 26 years is 26 years, and a man does not turn that off like a spigot. And there was a grief in me that day that had nothing to do with the land and everything to do with the girl from town who once thought a farm boy was worth marrying. I let myself feel it, standing there. And then my son hollered something across the field, some ordinary thing about the planter, and I hollered back. And the grief loosened its grip the way it does when there is work to be done and a boy who needs his daddy to teach him to do it right. That is the thing about land. It does not let you sit in your sorrow long. There is always a fence down somewhere, a calf coming, a season turning. The work that nearly cost me my marriage turned out to be the same work that carried me out the other side of losing it. I want to be fair, because the brand of this is not cruelty. Donna is my children's mother, and I have never run her down in front of them, and I never will. Because they did not do anything wrong, and a child gets to love a parent without the other one poisoning it. What she did to me and to this land. She will carry that. But my kids get to keep loving their mama, and they will, and I will never be the reason they could not. Here is what I have left for you, and then I will let you get some rest. Root rot does not show at the top. The stalk stays green, and the leaves look fine.
And you can stand at the edge of a field that looks like the best crop you ever grew, never knowing there is nothing underneath holding it down. Until the day the wind comes and lays the whole thing flat. A marriage can do that. A man can too. So tend your roots. Pay attention to what is happening down where you cannot see. Not out of suspicion, but out of respect for the things you are putting your whole life into. And if the wind ever does come and lay your field flat, do not stand there in the wreck and burn what is left in a rage. Get quiet. Find out what you actually own, what your people actually built, what is truly yours, and what was only ever shared. Protect the legacy and the children who are meant to inherit it. Keep your hands clean, and let the law and the plain truth do the work. You will plant again, and you will still have ground worth planting in. If somebody ever talks the person closest to you into reaching for what your family built, hear me. You cannot always stop the reaching, but you can make sure that long before that day comes, you know exactly what is yours. You keep it separate and clean and documented, and you listen to the hard old men who told you to protect it when you were too young and too in love to think you ever would need to. It keeps the land in the family. It keeps you out of the poorhouse and out of trouble, and it lets you hand your boy the same ground your great-grandfather handed down, whole, the way it was always meant to pass. Take care of yourselves out there. Tend your roots. And tell me where you are watching from tonight. I read every single one.